Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the new NBA All-Star teams that were just released, and I definitely have some thoughts on how people treat these teams. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing, because I upload basically every single day. Okay, so whenever these NBA All-Star teams are announced, specifically the reserves, and we know who everybody is on each team, it's not only time to be like, hey, that guy made an all-star team, that's really cool, but it's also time for a lot of people to just complain about everything about the all-star teams. Which also means that it's time to make people that didn't make it, aka snubs, a way bigger deal than it should be. And to be honest, there's only one player that was egregiously left off of either of these teams, in my opinion. Okay, but in all seriousness, there are really no issues that I have with these teams. Now, certainly I would have had different teams on both sides, but I don't have a huge issue with any one player that got left off or any one player that is on the team. And there's a simple reason for that. In any given NBA season, there are most of the time more than 24 players worthy of an all-star selection. There's only 24 spots, or whatever it is, 24 or 26, however many players are on each side. There's only that many spots throughout the league, and most of the time, there's more players that are worthy of making an all-star team. Like you could look at a player that this year didn't make the all-star team that would have made it in 2013 or 2014 or 2015. It's a year-by-year thing, and I don't necessarily believe in this idea of someone that got snubbed, because if you look at this all-star team, every single one of them deserved to be on there. Now, maybe there were some players that got left off that you could argue deserve to be on there more, but it's not like you're looking, and I can't even think of it. It's not like Shabazz Napier made the all-star team and Bradley Beal didn't. You know what I mean? Like, that's what people are acting like right now. And so let's just go ahead and get into the two people that I mostly want to talk about in this video, and it's Bradley Beal and Devin Booker. Those are the two guys that everybody's bringing up, saying, why didn't they make the team? Why didn't they make the team? Look at how many points they're scoring. They've never had points per game averages this high, not make the all-star team in like 35 years. What is happening? And first, I want to talk about Beal. So first, let's talk about this statement from his agent after it was announced that he did not make the all-star team. The Wizards are in a rebuilding situation, and this wasn't going to be a year where they were going to be a playoff team, and everyone knew it. Yet he, Beal, has gone and played his heart out every single night to try and make them as competitive as they can be, and coaches have held it against him that he decided to stay the course with the team instead of jumping ship and joining someone's bandwagon, and I think that's a terrible message. What is this guy talking about? Like, yes, Beal signed a very financially lucrative extension, by the way, to stay with the Washington Wizards. And if you want to praise him for being loyal, that's fine. Probably had more to do with money than anything else, which is also fine. But let's not twist it like Bradley Beal has this soft place in his heart for the Washington Wizards. It was probably more about the money, and it's very, very unlikely, in my opinion, that he's going to play out this contract, this entire contract, and still be in Washington, given their situation as a team. Which, again, nothing wrong with that. I have no issues with that with Beal at all, but let's just call it what it is here. And then the other part that bothers me about this particular statement is he makes it seem like Beal got left off of this team because there are other players that not only are winning more games, which is true and fair, but also that these are players that the only reason they're winning more games is because they jump ship to a different team, which just isn't true. If we're looking specifically at the guard category in terms of the reserves, only 2 guards made it off the bench. Everybody else was a front court player, because you get 3 front courts, 2 guards, and 2 wild cards. Both wild card spots went to technically front court players. The only 2 guards that made it over Beal were Khris Middleton, who's not a guy that just like jumped around on a bandwagon. The Bucks like found him and developed him, and then Ben Simmons, who was drafted in Philadelphia. So the only player that he could potentially be talking about here is Jimmy Butler, who's a forward, not listed in the guard category, and is having an objectively better season than Bradley Beal. So I don't really understand where that argument is coming from. And it also doesn't make sense that he's saying, hey, don't punish my guy for not jumping on a bandwagon, for not jumping around to different teams. Which is fair. Like, if you want to say don't punish him, like the team's not very good, they weren't going to win very many games, look at how good of a player he is, everybody around the league thinks he's an all-star caliber player. If you want to make that argument, that's fine, but then you can't also turn around and make it seem like he should get bonus points for staying loyal and staying in Washington and signing an extension that, again, was largely about the money, at least from the outside perspective, me just looking in on it. That's what it seems like to me. So you can't have it both ways here, and most of the argument that you're making about why your guy should have made it, which is fine if you want to advocate for him, but it should at least make sense, and this simply doesn't. And it's just funny to me because all of a sudden it seems like half the NBA community are huge Bradley Beal fans. I just haven't gotten that vibe the entire season, whether it be social media or talking to people or just different articles, nobody cares about the Wizards. Nobody cares about Bradley Beal. Like, yeah, they're fun on some nights. They can score the ball. They give up a ton of points. So if you want to watch them on League Pass, they can be mildly entertaining at times. But nobody's, really out there advocating for Bradley Beal until yesterday. And now all of a sudden, everybody is a Bradley Beal fan. They're saying, why didn't he make it? He should have made it over this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. And it's not a Bradley Beal conversation. It's not a Devin Booker conversation. It's I'm going to argue for the guy that didn't make it every single time conversation, which is fine. If you want to be that guy that just is a devil's advocate about every single thing and you want to just argue the opposite point of what everybody else is going with, that's fine, but call it that. Don't say I'm a huge Bradley Beal fan. I've watched 82 Wizards games this year when they've only played 50. Like, don't be that guy that said, I've actually sat down and watched every single game. I know exactly what's happening, because we know that's not true. Nobody's watching that many Wizards games, and just understand that you just call it what it is. And it's the same issue that we have with all-star teams every single year. If Bradley Beal did make it over someone like Trae Young, we'd be having the exact same conversation about, look at his numbers. We've never had a guy with these kinds of numbers not make the team. Even though his team isn't winning games, he's definitely one of the best players in the Eastern Conference. We would have been having that conversation. If Beal made it over someone like Khris Middleton or Jayson Tatum, there would have been those people in the corner saying, oh no, I've watched every single Bucks and Celtics game. You have to watch the games to fully understand their impact. Their impact goes far beyond the numbers. They're really good. They're winning games. Why is a loser like Bradley Beal on the All-Star team? If he made it over someone like Domantas Sabonis, there would have been complaints about the fact that, Sabonis only made it because of his play style. He's not a guard. It's not, his interior-based game isn't as exciting, so he's not going to make the team over someone like Beal. There's excuses to make every single step of the way, which to me makes it seem like it's just irrelevant and unnecessary to try and make excuses. There are players, certainly this season, that did not make the All-Star team, that had a season that objectively is worthy of being an All-Star. And if they made it, there would have been very, very little evidence to say, hey, they shouldn't have made it. But you know who else the case is for that? Every single other player that made the All-Star team this year. If you look at all 24 or 26 guys, however many there are, you can look at them and say, this is why they made it, and it makes absolute sense. If you want to argue another guy over them, that's fine, but don't say that this person didn't deserve it, because every single one of them did. And basically the entire conversation that we just had about Bradley Beal can also be said for Devin Booker. If he made it over someone like Chris Paul, there would have been people complaining about the difference in the wins of their respective teams. If he made it over someone like Russell Westbrook, people would have been talking about how he's been really good lately. He's been borderline carrying this Rockets team for the last couple of weeks. There are arguments to be made in every single direction, and that's ultimately what this is for, right? And it does a great job of it. The All-Star selections and the All-Star game as a whole are meant to create conversation, and that's why it's in the middle of the season. Because if we didn't have this, people wouldn't be paying attention to the NBA very much. The Super Bowl is coming up, there's other stuff going on, and people simply wouldn't care as much about basketball if there wasn't an All-Star conversation to have. It's why it's in the middle of the season, and it does a great job of creating that conversation. I'm making a video about it. I'm sure plenty of other people will as well. There's all kinds of discussions and conversations being had on social media, but understand that that's what it's for. It's not for you to look back on historically and use it as this big accolade and say, look how much better this guy was, and this guy, he made this many All-Star teams, he made that many All-Star teams, because it's inherently flawed. You're going by positions that don't make any sense. Ben Simmons is a guard, Jimmy Butler is a forward, and there's all kinds of different stuff there. You're going by conferences, so you're not truly picking the best 24 players across the entire league, and ultimately, it's a flawed system. And guess what? We all know that. Not one of us looks at the All-Star selection process, whether it's reserves or starters, and says that is a perfect way to do it, okay? So what it comes down to is if someone that didn't make it that you think should have, just blame the fact that it's a flawed system and that under different circumstances, Bradley Beal would have made it, or Devin Booker would have made it, and Chris Paul wouldn't have, and Khris Middleton wouldn't have. If that was the case, if it was a different system, yes, those guys would have been All-Stars, and some other guys wouldn't have, which tells you that they all were worthy of making the All-Star team. It just depends on the format, and this one just happens to be incredibly flawed. And so ultimately my point here is, these All-Star selection things are relatively useless. The All-NBA teams are so much more critical in terms of the financial incentive, whether players are going to get more money on their next contract. And historically, we look at that as these were, the best 15 to maybe, 18 players, because they are still split up by positions in the entire league in a given season. We look at those with so much more reverence historically than we do All-Star teams, and those are the teams that really matter, and the selection process should really be about getting it right and making sure that we have the right guys on those teams. The All-Star teams are more about creating conversation, and they do a great job of that. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the NBA looks at this process and is like, yeah, this is flawed, this doesn't really, perfectly identify the best players in a given season, but let's keep the system this way because it continues to allow for a ton of conversations about who did and didn't make it. So at the end of the day, for me, no, I don't have any all-star snubs. You want to know why? Because the guys that made it absolutely deserve to make the team. Maybe there's some other guys that you thought should have made it over them, and that's fine, but there's probably 30 to 32 all-star caliber players in the NBA this season, and they can't all make the team. That's just the way that it is. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.